Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Modern War Institute's Commandant's Speaker Series. Today we are honored to host Sergeant First Class Sean Ambriz. In a moment, Sergeant Ambriz will share stories from his deployments to northeastern Afghanistan that highlight the importance of leadership, building cohesive teams, and discipline. But first, a brief introduction about Sergeant Ambriz. Sergeant First Class Ambriz enlisted in the United States Army in 2008 as a military police soldier. Since that time, he has served in a wide variety of duty positions to include driver, gunner, platoon medic, team leader, designated squad marksman, squad leader, special reaction team NCOIC, and a platoon sergeant. He has served 2 tours in Afghanistan, during which he received 2 Bronze Star medals with Valor Device and a Purple Heart. He is currently assigned to the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence as the MP Senior Leader Course Instructor. He has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a concentration in Homeland Security. Finally, Sergeant Ambriz is an author having recently published a book, Ghosts of the Valley, that provides a gripping account of Sergeant Ambriz's deployment to Afghanistan. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of Sergeant Ambriz's talk, so please type your name and your question into the team chat. At this time, it is my great pleasure to welcome Sergeant First Class Sean Ambriz to our virtual stage. Sean, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the introduction. I don't have a lot of time, and I have 2 major battles to kind of get into, so I apologize if I talk fast. I apologize if I accidentally let a cuss word slip out here or there. It's just kind of my lingo, but I'm gonna kind of get right to the point. Go ahead, next slide. So the first battle I'm going to talk about is Saw Valley, September 10th, 2009. Next slide. In the northeastern part of Afghanistan, the Nuristan and Kunar province of Afghanistan is generally where I served both of my deployments. This is the same area in which 10 or I think 11 Medal of Honor recipients received their award. Most of you know the Outpost movie, the Lone Survivor movie. Those are all documented based off of these mountain areas. Next slide. The Battle of Kamdesh, the outpost, Kop Keating, most of you know about, where 400 Taliban members infiltrated and overran the combat outpost, was at Kamdesh that you see towards the top. The specific battle that I'll be talking about today is just to the south in the red squared area. This is exactly 30 days before the Battle of Kamdesh took place, and the 300 or 400 Taliban members used our battle as target practice prior to that engagement. Next slide. And then this is just a little zoomed in area. Next slide. So on the morning of September 10th, we received a call to Valley in which our MP squad was activated after a 3-day convoy escort patrol that we had done. And we only had maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And when we responded, saw a valley that you see right there. At the time, bin Laden was alive, and this was one of his area of operations in which he would patrol from Pakistan, which was about 200 meters away from Saw Valley. So it's easy for him to infiltrate and run his operations out of the safe house that was currently in Saw Valley. So it was a very high targeted, dangerous area. There was a cavalry unit that we were attached to, a platoon that you see over to the left, and they had run a patrol up this mountain, up the Zengabosha Draw, and they received contact. So they had multiple WOAs, or wounded in action, and we got called to respond to be a medevac to bring those wounded home. Next slide. As we arrived on scene, there was a civilian jingle truck in the middle of the road. And if you know anything about Afghanistan terrain, the mountainous terrain, off to the left of the driver's side was about a 150-foot cliff off into the Kunar River, into the water's edge. And then to our right was the mountain, and the road is only as wide as the vehicles. There is no turning around. It's just straight, and you have to push straight through. But this jingle truck was blocking the way, and it's essentially like an Afghan version of a semi-truck. And the doors were open. There was no driver or passenger in sight. We later found out that they were captured and beheaded. And as our first truck pulled into the area, they were pulling right into the kill zone of an RPG and PKM machine gun team up to our right-hand side of the mountain. Next slide. Luckily, our first gunner was paying attention, and he was able to engage and suppress those targets, and the squad leader made the decision to go ahead and push that jingle truck out of the way. And in doing so, the tires turned, and the truck went off the cliff edge, and as it rolled down the edge into the river, 50 to 60 155 artillery projectiles rolled out the back, and luckily none of them ignited, or else I wouldn't be here right now. So it was kind of a scare. We didn't really know what was going on, and so then we linked up with the cavalry unit towards the bottom of the mountain. Next slide. As we got to the bottom of the mountain, there was an infantry first sergeant standing there, and he was asking for volunteers to go up and be a part of a rescue mission to extract the wounded and the two squads that were pinned down by the sniper up north. And I saw the platoon sergeant and a squad leader of the cavalry scouts volunteer, the first sergeant obviously, and then 4 of my team leaders, Sergeant Keel, Corporal Sisto, Sergeant Michigan, and Sergeant Lee, all volunteered to go up. And at the time, I was a private first class, and I was in a role of a medic as an MP. And they kind of gave me the courage to want to go up and render my medical services to whoever needed it. So as I started to run back towards my truck to grab my first aid bag, my first sergeant, the first sergeant that was right there said, "Hey, where are you going?" I told him to grab my aid bag, and he said, "Don't worry about it. We just got a call on the radio. They're about 200 meters up the mountain. It's going to be a quick snatch and grab. We don't have time." So I did what I was told, and we started making our way up the mountain. Next slide. This is one of the last images from that moment. The first sergeant is the first one on the hill that you could see towards the top. Then it's Corporal Sisto, and then myself is the third one, and Sergeant Keel, my team leader, the fourth one. This is us making the incline up the mountain. Next slide. 50 feet later, we're pinned down by a sniper from Saw Valley. I'm the one in the middle on the right-hand side, pinned down behind the bushes. And we had horrible cover and concealment, and so the first sergeant made a call just to get up the mountain and run. And so we kind of zigzagged in and out of the terrain until we got to the 200-meter mark. Next slide. And next slide. Go and press play. Next slide. So that was a video that I took in that moment once we reached that 200-meter mark, and we were kind of sitting there trying to figure out what was going on. Next slide. Once we got to the 200-meter mark, we radioed in to the 2 pinned down squads up north and said, "Hey, we're at this grid location. Where are you?" And the radios were coming in a little staticky because of the incline mountainous terrain. It was hard to sometimes reach communications. And they said negative. We said 2000 meters. So it was not 200, it was 2000. And we had little to no medical supplies. I had no water, no food, no nothing, just our basic combat load of ammunition. And we had gone too far. It was getting too dark too quick. And I, at this point as a private, was kind of coming to the conclusion that we weren't going to walk out of this without paying a bigger price. But I looked at my NCOs and my leaders, and they were making decisions, and they didn't seem phased at all. Next slide. Go ahead and press play.
Yeah, Roger. Just let you guys know. Casualty cadets is
Sergeant Keel.
He is only cover right now. He's RKIA. He is wide out in the open, and that's who the sniper has the sticks on. They both dropped down at the same time to try and get some concealment. Our one element was shot in the head, and he was shot. So the only way we can get these guys out of here right now is if we move them both.
100%.
Roger. And in order to do that, what's the course do we need to put an eye on?
Hey.
All right, go ahead, next slide. So that was us reaching up into the first cornfield, and we heard on the radio that there was now 1 KIA. And I looked over at the platoon sergeant, Sergeant Egan, and I asked him who was killed, because I didn't have a radio. And without being really phased by it at all, and with a serious face, he said it was my lieutenant. And Lieutenant Parton was not my organic lieutenant, but like I said, we were attached to this platoon, and so I knew him pretty well as far as, I interacted him in the CP and stuff like that, and he always played his guitar and sang music and stuff, and he was an amazing guy. He's really nice. And before I could show any gratitude, or not, I shouldn't say gratitude, but before I could show any type of emotion towards Sergeant Egan and kind of apologize and say I'm sorry or anything, his first action was that he reached in between his body armor and his plates, and he pulled out a water bottle. It was a quarter of the way filled, and he barely had any water, and he reached out in front of him and he put the water in front of me, and he told me to drink it because they had to keep me going. And I was kind of taken back by that in a moment of just complete despair, that he just got told that his battle buddy, his his lieutenant and partner was killed, his first action as a leader was to go ahead and take care of me and ensure that my well-being was his first priority. And I didn't understand how somebody had that type of mental fortitude. I couldn't understand how somebody was that strong mentally to think about somebody else in a moment like that. And before I could really enjoy that moment of nurture, it was kind of taken from me, and we got told we got to push up into these cornfields. And so we moved into these terraces where essentially like these cuts in the mountain that these cornfields grow into. And as we got up into the last one, there was a tree that First Sergeant and Corporal Sisto had climbed up, and I was the third one up. And as I threw my weapon over the ledge and I climbed up, I saw Corporal Sisto, and he was telling me to be quiet. And I low crawled up next to him, and First Sergeant rolled over on his side and turned his radio down. And I asked Corporal Sisto what was going on, and it was quiet. No, we weren't taking fire at this point, but the corn stalks were moving, and we could hear wind blowing them. And First Sergeant asked the two squads up there, are you guys anywhere near these cornfields? And they said, no, we're above those cornfields. There's no one of ours in there. And so then we started hearing corn stalks cracking under feet. And so we realized very quickly that the enemy was in between us. And so First Sergeant told us to pull out frag grenades, and we threw them into the cornfield, and we moved forward after they detonated. And there were 3 dead Taliban fighters, and there was like a Vietnamese or Vietnam type style hole that they were crawling out of. And then it was a realization of, okay, now the enemy's on the same mountain as us, in between our 2 elements, and we had to be really careful where we were stepping at this point. Go ahead, next slide. All right, next slide. So this kind of just shows the terrain that we were dealing with. And so now this is the layout that we were looking at. And originally we just were told it was a single sniper, but now we're being told that there was possibly 3 different snipers up this mountain draw, and they had every angle of our approach covered. The cross indicates where LT's body is currently at, about 175 meters in front of the most forward element, laying there by himself. Next slide.
Come behind you. Behind you. Pull up.
Go ahead, next slide. So once we were sitting at this donkey trail, go back one, please. Once we were sitting at this donkey trail from that video that you had just seen, that was our last piece of cover and concealment before we could go out and try to recover LT's body and the other wounded in the 2 squads. But we were trying to figure out very quickly how could we get out there with 3 snipers covering every single angle of this draw. And the First Sergeant asked, our close air support if we could go, and they said, no, you're going to get shot if you try to go out there. So essentially our mission was to call in a smoke mission from Bostic, and they would drop 155 artillery rounds of white phosphorus that would generate enough smoke and create a smoke wall in front of the snipers. Problem is we didn't know where the snipers were, and we didn't want to bring Willie Pete too close into LT's body or the other wounded, because if you know anything about Willie Pete, it will burn you both inside your lungs, and it'll burn right through your skin. And so we were taking a heavy chance on dropping it too far in front of the snipers or behind them, and then dropping it too far forward on top of our own men. So it was a very dangerous, close mission, but it's something that needed to be done because there was no way that we were going to be able to go out there and rescue them. Go ahead, next slide. And so from this image that you see right here, I think there's one more video. Once the smoke hit, we ran out, and there was no real formation. We just kind of sprinted and jumped from ledge to ledge until we started running across bodies, and we started pulling people back. And the snipers were shooting through the smoke at this time because they knew what we were kind of trying to do. And you'll see, I think in this next video, the first casualty I come across is an Afghan army guy who had gotten shot or took shrapnel into his left inner calf. And so I started to work on him a little bit, and then you'll start to hear rockets come in, and that's the Kiowa helicopters doing gun runs on the 2 Taliban groups that you see on the left and right hand side. They were essentially waiting for us to come. They knew a rescue mission was going to come, and they were waiting for us to come into the draw so they could collapse in on us and then completely surround us. Go ahead, next slide. Looks like we're having some issues. Don't worry about it. Go ahead, next slide. So essentially what happened was we ran out there. I worked on the casualty. And as I'm working on this Afghan army soldier, I packaged him up, and they brought LT's body over. And LT at this point was already dead. And before I could actually go look at him, I looked off to my left-hand side and saw two bloody hands reach up onto this boulder. And it was one of the squad leaders, Sergeant Russ, who I saw a trail of blood coming from behind him, and he was low crawling and pulling himself. He was completely incapacitated and could not use his legs. I looked down. He was a bigger man, about 6'3", way bigger than me. And he had gotten shot twice in the knee, and he had put 2 tourniquets on himself. One of them had come undone, so I knew that I was going to cause him a little bit of pain as I stepped onto his femoral artery and I tightened that tourniquet. And as I did, I didn't really look at his face because I was concerned with the major hemorrhaging of the blood. But I could hear him choking on blood. And so I looked over at his face and I saw that he had gotten shot in the mouth and into his lower jaw, and he was choking on his own blood and his tongue. So I went into his mouth and grabbed his tongue and told him to bite down on it so that he wouldn't suffocate on his own tongue. And he was at this point kind of giving up and didn't really want to move. And I had to kind of encourage him because, you know, I was thinking of what my NCOs were kind of doing for me. And I pulled him up, and I was kind of putting him in more pain because I'm of smaller stature than him. So Sergeant Keel and Corporal Sisto came over and helped me, and they took him from me. And then there was nobody to carry LT's body, and so nobody really wanted to do it. And I volunteered to go ahead and grab LT. So as I started to pull on LT, he had his vest off, and I pulled on his uniform, and his ACH was on, but it was behind his head. And I was trying to be as careful as you could in a moment like that to try to be respectful. But we started to notice that the smoke was clearing and the snipers were going to start shooting at us here soon. So I started to use every inch of adrenaline that I had in my body to pull him back another 75 meters to that last donkey path. And as I got him there, I collapsed next to his body and fell down and kind of inhaled some dirt. And I'm thinking at this point, like, there's just no way we're getting down off this mountain. And I looked up, and my NCOs were already formulating that next phase of the plan. We had people that were taking on 2 different, body armored vests. They were taking multiple weapons. They were sorry about that. And so we got broken up into three groups. The first sergeant broke myself, Sergeant Lee, the interpreter, and a Cav scout into the first group with him. And essentially we were going to go down and we were going to recon a route for everybody to get down the mountain. And so the middle group was the Afghan army soldiers, and the last group was carrying. And as we started to make our way down, we were no longer taking fire at this point. And it was pretty quiet until an Afghan soldier decided to use his flashlight. Go ahead and next slide. And as he used his flashlight, that just showed Saw Valley, our position. And all of Saw Valley, as well as 2 additional fighting positions with B-10 rockets, Russian-made B-10 rockets on the adjacent mountain, started to open up on us. And these were our positions coming down the mountain. And then, as you can see, all of the different enemy positions. And so we just pretty much got hammered at this point. And so I had slid down a path next to a rock wall. I had First Sergeant in between my legs, and the interpreter collapsed on my body as he told me he was shot. And I started to put a pressure dressing onto his shoulder. I rolled him off of me. And at this point, I started to black out, and I started to get really tired. I think I was reaching heat exhaustion at this point. And I blacked out for I don't know how long. But when I woke up, I felt like my body was being pelted by rocks. And there was a Kiowa helicopter above us with his Gatling gun, and he was laying down suppressive fire, and all of his brass was falling onto our body. And I looked over to my right, and I could hear First Sergeant yelling into his radio, "Broken arrow," which, if you don't know what broken arrow is, it's essentially a term that was used in Vietnam. I don't think it's a actual published term anymore, but everyone knows what kind of broken arrow means. Is it's a unit that's on the verge of being overwhelmed or overrun, and every air asset that's in Afghanistan had to come to our location at that point. And I looked over to the right, and there was a C-130 Spectre gunship raining down onto the rocket positions. And I looked to my left, and there was another Afghan soldier making his way down the mountain, still using his flashlight. And he got maybe 3 steps in. He looked up and took two bullets to the face, and his body collapsed onto a rock ledge. And I tried rolling over to grab him, but his foot was stuck in between 2 boulders, and I couldn't get him. So I was yelling up to the Afghans to go ahead and grab his body. And First Sergeant was getting ready to start pushing us down this mountain. And I looked over the rock wall, and I saw this big red ball, this rocket come in and land just on the other side of the rock wall, about 15 meters below us. And it peppered all of our location with shrapnel. That's when I got peppered. The rock wall collapsed onto my shoulder, dislocating it. And then First Sergeant just told us to keep pushing down this route. And so as we were pushing down the route, Sergeant Lee, who was right behind me, we were charged on reconning a route, because the route we had come up the mountain was too dense for the wounded to get down. And Sergeant Lee accidentally hit a rock, and it came down on my already wounded shoulder. And at this point, I was completely done. I couldn't move. I was in too much pain. And so I told Sergeant Lee to put my shoulder back into place. And with my gear and all the weapons I was carrying, he couldn't do it. So he's doing all this under fire. And I told him just use the buttstock of his M4. And so he started to repeatedly slam his buttstock into my shoulder until it popped back into place. And we made our way down the mountain. And as the F-16s got on station, they dropped 2 500-pound GBUs, or guided bombs, onto the enemy positions, which was good for us. But at the same time, it lit up the entire area. And Saw Valley just saw myself and Sergeant Lee walking in this open area. And so I dove between these 2 boulders as we were taking incoming rounds. And as we were making our way down, we were kind of marking chem lights the whole way so that the rest of the groups can find their way down the mountain. Because at this point it was too dark, and it was poor moonlight, and of course our NVGs are going out, and it was hard to tell if a cliff was 3 feet or 30 feet. And a lot of the time we were having to kick rocks off the ledge to tell how long it would take that rock to fall. And that's how we were determining, which way we were going to kind of go. And as I made my way down to the bottom of the mountain and I marked my last chem light, I made it onto the road, and I was the first one down. And I told my squad leader, Sergeant Brown, that I had made it to the bottom. And I met up with a friend of mine, Specialist Patsky, who was by his truck. And we weren't really taking too much fire at this point. And he asked me if I was okay. And I said I really didn't know at that time. I was still kind of taken back by everything. And I looked to my left up the road, way in front of our convoy, and there was a lone American walking by himself towards us. You could tell it was an American because of the gear, but his chin strap was undone and his vest was completely open. He was literally dragging his rifle into the ground, just all over the dirt. And as he got closer, I could tell it was Corporal Sisto. And he came over to me and Patsky at the front of the truck, and he collapsed in our arms, and I set him up against the tire, and I'm checking him to make sure he's not shot. And I'm wondering why he was coming from so far ahead in front of the convoy. And I asked him, are you okay? Are you hit? And he didn't want to talk about it, but we later found out the next day that during the initial barrage, he had fallen off a cliff to the left and couldn't make his way back up towards us. And so he had to find his own way down. And in doing so, he heard people speaking Pashto, and he thought it was the Afghan army soldiers, but it was the Taliban that you see towards the top right-hand side. And so he had to take off his gear and ditch it, and then hide between 2 boulders and survive with his pistol pretty much until the Taliban had left the area, and so he wouldn't be captured. So after that was all complete, I put Sisto in the truck. I went into the truck myself, and I took my helmet off, and I was so dehydrated. I was looking for a water bottle, but my gunner knocked over all these Mark 19 cans, and water bottles were everywhere. And I reached down and picked up the first water bottle, and I opened it up, and when that first sip hit me, I realized it was my piss bottle from earlier that day. So I could not have imagined the day ending any better than that at that point. So that kind of completes. And then go ahead and next slide real quick. This kind of shows the air assets that we had. The Black Hawk later came on scene because we couldn't get the wounded down, and hoisted the rest of the wounded and LT's body out of the kill zone, and then everyone else made their way down. Next slide. And then once everyone was down off the mountain, we made our way back to Fob Bostic. Next slide. So this is Lieutenant Parton. He was a West Point graduate himself. And like I said, he was part of 361 Cav. If you would like to donate to his foundation, that is the link. Next slide. So now I'm going to quickly get into the Battle for Blessing. This one doesn't have any videos, and you'll realize very quickly why. I didn't have time to film or do anything. This was on August 4th, 2011. Almost, a year later or so, I volunteered to go back to Afghanistan. Now I'm a sergeant, and I had 3 soldiers under my belt. And so now it was my turn to go ahead and deliver these soldiers down into combat and bring them home alive. Next slide. So just to the south, most of you have heard the Korngal or seen the documentary, the Restrepo. That's essentially the same valley we were operating out of. And the enemy controlled all of this area because the year prior, the Americans had pulled out, and the enemy controlled all of this area. And there was a major operation in which we were going to take back this entire valley. And the operation was called Operation Diamond Head. And you had infantry and rangers on the other hilltops, and they were air assaulted in the night before. And MPs were going to be the first ones into the valley because everything had to be done jointly with the Afghan police. And I was the first truck because I was the only person in the entire company that had been to this area of Afghanistan. And as I linked up with I got to the first checkpoint that the Afghan police were supposed to be, the checkpoint was engulfed in flames, and the police officers were all beheaded, and their heads were on sticks outside. And there was a message on the wall that was spray painted, and I asked the interpreter what it said, and it told us to keep coming. And essentially, the Taliban knew that we were coming. They knew the operation information had slipped out, and they were taunting us to come deeper into the valley. And so we kind of knew that it was going to be a long fight, longer than what we probably originally imagined. Next slide. So on the morning of August 4th, 2011, we received a call that a Afghan police convoy or humanitarian assistance convoy, as you see indicated by that the foliage up there, was in contact by the enemy to the south. And initially, it just seemed like a normal firefight. They were taking some pot shots, but we happened to be at a stationary battle position to the east, and we were the closest element, so they activated us to go render aid and kind of get them out of the kill zone. Next slide. So as we arrived on scene, our first gun truck, I was in the 3rd truck, our first gun truck came face to face with the convoy. Most of the convoy had left, and they just kind of pushed through the kill zone. But there was a couple Afghan police officers that were pinned down, and there was a fuel truck that was all shot up. And that's what that indication is right there. And they were completely cut off and left behind. And so as we arrived on scene, I couldn't see much because I was kind of around this mountain bend, but I could hear gunfire, but nothing was really being shot at us. And so I asked my squad leader what was going on, and he said that there was a fuel truck blocking the road, and there was an Afghan police officer in the ditch on the right-hand side, and he was shot, and he was kind of waving his arms and screaming for help. And so I really didn't know the situation. We didn't have a medic, so I was the medic again. I didn't know where the enemy was at. I didn't know if this was a deliberate complex ambush. I just knew that we were kind of taking fire, and it probably wasn't smart of me to just kind of run into this, but it's what needed to be done because I wasn't going to let the police officer bleed out. So I told my squad leader, Sergeant Castellano, Sergeant Cass, I said, I'll get out, I'll dismount, I'll grab the wounded. And so I had 3 soldiers in my truck and a Afghan JTAC, or excuse me, Air Force JTAC. And I told Garcia, my driver, I said, you're in charge of all communications, get our satellite communications up, get us some close air support, because I kind of felt that we were going to need it. I told my gunner Doyle, who he walked away from this deployment with the most kills, around 60-something kills. I told him, because he was a hot shot, that I needed him to start loading some additional rounds, and I needed him to start laying down suppressive fire, help me out, and try to get as many kills as he could. And then I looked at my 3rd soldier, Specialist Melton, who had already had a deployment to Afghanistan under his belt. And I told him, hey, man, like, when I'm not here, you're in charge of these 2. Like, get these guys whatever they need and help them out. And he kind of nodded his head. And so I crawled to the back of the truck. I grabbed my aid bag, and I told Melton to drop the ramp. And he prepped a smoke grenade to kind of conceal my movement. And as the ramp dropped and I heard the smoke grenade was out, the smoke was late on dispersion. So The enemy just saw my ass running from the third truck all the way to the first truck with no concealment. So it was kind of game on at that point. And the fire, it seemed at a normal distance, which was like maybe 200 meters away. It didn't seem too close initially. And as I got up to the first truck, I kind of assessed my situation. I looked off to my left, and as you see, what would be the bottom of the screen, all that green foliage, is all cornfields right off to the side of the road. And then it led to the base of the mountain, in which it inclined higher around us. And then to the right, I had a waterway ditch, and then up into this little village, the village of Mateen. And I saw the Afghan police officer 40 feet in front of me off to the right in the ditch, and he was kind of pleading for me to come and save him. And so I ran towards the fuel truck, and I baseball slid into the ditch. And at this point, I'm the only American on ground still. And as I got into the ditch, I got up next to him, and I baseball gripped his wound, which was to the lower left part of his leg where he was shot. I pulled out my tourniquet, and I started to work on him. And then I started noticing the fire started getting a hell of a lot closer, and the cracks were getting louder, and it started to get more frequent. And so the police officer was freaking out, and he was actually digging with his bare hands in his nails for more defilade and trying to give us more cover. And I started to feel like things kind of creeping down my neck, like it just felt like something was falling all over me. And I reached my head up a little bit and looked, and I saw that the brick wall that I was laying next to, rounds were coming in about 4 or 5 inches above my head and the Afghan police officer's head, and it was cracking the brick or crumbling the brick all over us. And so as he was freaking out more and more, he was loosening the tourniquet and kind of messing it up. So I rolled his body into my body armor so that, if a bullet came in, then I would take the hit instead of him. And I kind of laid there realizing very quickly that I was kind of screwed, and I couldn't lift my head up. I couldn't get out. And so I heard the first truck pull up parallel to the ditch I was in, and I heard the air compressed door open, and it was my squad leader, Sergeant Kaz, and he got out. And I couldn't turn around, but I yelled to him. I needed him to help me to get me out of this position. So he pulled out some frag grenades, and he rolled them to the other side of the truck. And I kind of took that as my cue, and I got out of the ditch, and I was carrying my patient. And at first I was wondering why he threw the grenade so close to the other side of the truck, but I really wasn't questioning him. And then that's when we got F-16s on station, and they were doing show of force runs about 100 feet off the ground. And they were so low I could see the pilot's red helmet. And they were just kind of hitting their afterburners and trying to scare the enemy away, but nothing really seemed to be working. And so I got into the first truck, and I started to assess my casualty, and I packaged him up, and I worked on him. And I looked at the gunner, Jelinus, and I said, "Hey, man, watch this guy, make sure he doesn't bleed out." And he said, "I'm trying, but my gun's jammed," and he started working on his gun. And if any of you know that he had a CROWS system, which essentially the gunner could sit inside the vehicle, and he had a computer screen in front of him, and the gun was controlled up top where he didn't have to be exposed. But I noticed that everybody kind of just stopped what they were doing, and they were looking up, and I wasn't really sure why. And I looked up outside the turret, and I noticed that Sergeant Lane was up there, and he was completely exposing himself. So I got up top with him, and I started to return fire, and that's when we started to notice that we were being surrounded completely. Next slide. And all the enemies started to move into our location. Next slide. And next thing you know, we were completely surrounded, and the enemy was getting within 50 feet or 50 meters of us. And so we had to go move the fuel truck out of the way, and we dumped the fuel so that so the Taliban couldn't seize its resources at all. And once we got back to our truck, it kind of just became a defensive fighting position. And the infantry guys, they were going to, head over and replace us in about 15 minutes. But we were told to stand by, sustain the casualty, and defend our fighting positions at all costs. And so it was just myself, Sergeant Lane, and Sergeant Castellanos that were defending our positions. And I could see the corn stalks moving, and I realized very quickly one of my last vivid thoughts was that they were going to try to overrun our position. And so we grabbed our boom boxes, we grabbed flashbangs, hand grenades, M203s, incendiary grenades. We were throwing everything we could into the cornfield to keep them back. And we were trying to cover all of our blind spots for our gunners, essentially because they were trying to get so close that our gunners' guns couldn't go downwards anymore. And so they were rushing in about teams of 2 or 3. And I shot about 25 203 grenades out of my rifle into the cornfield and trying to hit their egress routes. And as I shot the 26th one, the little knob on the front of the M203 came off and disabled my weapon. And so that was probably one of the better things that happened to me that day, because I threw it inside and I asked the gunner of the driver of truck 1 to give me his 249. And I grabbed the 249 and I locked and loaded my weapon. And I went to the back of the truck because Kaz and Lane were at the front, and they were returning fire to my back, and I was going to cover the cornfield. And my back was completely exposed, and I looked over at truck 2, and Sergeant Bino, the driver of truck 2, was waving his hands hysterically like he was trying to tell me something, but I really didn't understand what or why. And I just kind of said, you know, whatever. And I rounded the back of truck 1, and when I did, I experienced one of the scariest moments of my life. As I rounded the back of truck 1, I came face to face with 3 Taliban fighters that were about 6-7 feet away from me, and we were all 4 of us were kind of shocked to see one another. Kind of startled all 4 of us. And luckily I had the 249, and I painted it. I painted, you know, from the right enemy fire to the left. I let the recoil lift my weapon up to the left, and I cut these guys in half. And as 2 of them dropped into the base of the cornfield, one of them landed on the road, and I retreated to the back of the truck. And I was telling Kaz, like, we're about to get overran. Like, we need to either get out of here or get into the trucks. And we just started rolling more frag grenades on the other side to keep him back. And at that point, the guns were going too hot. They needed extra lubricant, but the lube was back into my truck, in truck 3. So I ran about 75 meters back to my truck, and I got into the back. And when I got into the truck, you know, I'm telling them, give me the lube, and I'm prepping my weapon. And it was at this point that my soldiers, my entire truck got silent. I could hear gunfire going on the outside. I could hear bullets bouncing off our armor on the outside. But it was like everything inside got sucked into a seashell. And I could hear the radio faintly in the background from the speakers. But no one talked. No one moved. Doyle wasn't shooting his weapon. And I kind of noticed it, and I looked up at them. And because I was so involved in my moment that I wasn't really paying attention. And all 3 of them were looking at me like they were about to break some bad news to me. And I looked up, and I kind of was like, what? And Garcia, who was manning the radio, said, the close air support just radioed in, and they believe that we're surrounded by an enemy force of 150 plus enemy fighters. And so there were four gun trucks of us. There were 16 of us Americans. So it was 16 Americans versus 150 plus enemy fighters. And they kind of had that scared look on their face, essentially the same scared look I had on my face on that mountain in September of 2009, when I didn't think that we were going to get off that mountain. And I had to make a decision as a leader right there. I could not show them fear. I could not show them concern. I had to find a way to motivate them. So I just said, you know, that's just more targets for us to hit, man. That's better for us. At least we know they're all around us. You know, we can't miss. And so I kind of told Garcia, you know, go, you know, get us some more close air support. Continue the show of force runs. And I looked at Doyle, and I gave him a love tap on his face, and I told him, man, give me some more kills, man. And I think I even challenged him, like, you can't get me 10 more kills. And he kind of smiled. He's like, I'll get you 11. And then Melton, I told him, like, he's like, dude, you got to take care of these guys. Like, I got to go back out there, like, drop the ramp. And it was one of those moments. It was a leader defining moment. Every leader has a defining moment. I think that was mine, where I needed my soldiers to understand that combat is very brutal and harsh. And I needed them to understand that and revert to their primal stages to overcome the enemy that day. And essentially that's what they did. And so when Melton dropped the ramp and I went back out, we were in that moment that we were going to go ahead and start turning around, getting our vehicles ready to leave as our replacement unit was coming. And so I got up and decided truck 1, since I was already up there, and the gun was still down, so I figured I'd get in the fight. And so I got up into the emergency hatch, and I started returning fire both sides with my my M14 EBR sniper rifle. And I looked up into the village, and there was a Taliban guy that had swung around the side of this mud hut, and he had gotten 3 shots off on me and hit the top of the truck. And I barely kind of got a chance to pull my buttstock up to my cheek, but I fired 2 shots into his torso. And before I could see him even drop on the ground, something exploded or something hit the top of the truck. But I got hit in the face, took some shrapnel, and then I collapsed inside the truck. My rifle, which the barrel was so hot, landed on a case of Monster energy drinks that exploded. And then I landed on Lane's lap, and he announced into the radio, you know, Zulu, which is my call sign. He said, Zulu's hit. And all I could think about were my soldiers, and they probably, you know, I felt so bad that they were alone in that truck with no leader, and that's the last image they saw of me, and that they think that, you know, I could be possibly dying. And so Lane, of course, because he was an OIF 1 vet, and he had seen so much combat before, he pulled the shrapnel out of my face, and he told me to stop being a pussy and get it back up in the gun. And so, you know, that one of the last moments I remember seeing was before I got up in the gun, I looked out the front windshield, and I saw one of the craziest things I ever had seen. And I saw Sergeant Castellanos, our squad leader, running from truck 1 or in front of our convoy behind us to go link up with the infantry guys and kind of let them know the situation. And as he's running, he's shooting into the cornfield, and he goes completely black on ammo. And he shot his last round out of his M4 rifle. And to the right, an enemy fighter came out of the cornfield, and it was just him versus Kaz, and Kaz was completely out of ammo. And he slung his M4, pulled out his M9 pistol, and shot him twice in the head, and just kept running to the rear of the convoy. And so we forever named him Pistol Pete. It was one of the most badass moments I'd ever seen. But when it was all said and done, next slide, the BDA, next slide, the BDA announced that we had killed, I think, 50 to 75 of the 150. I don't know how many wounded, but that was dead bodies that they had found. And then as we were exiting the airspace, because they were getting so close, the F-16s used their guns, and I think there's a 25 millimeter, and they did 25 meter gun runs in the cornfield, which was extremely dangerous close. But we were able to get out. No one else was wounded, and then we were able to extract the casualty and and save them. So next slide. So those are the two major battles. If you want to know more information, like I said, I did write a book about these experiences. My personal proceeds are going to go to the Lieutenant Tyler Parton Foundation. The book can be found on Amazon, Nook, or Kindle. Next slide. What are your questions?
Hey, Sergeant, we got one that's asking, what are some of the things that you think are required to build cohesive teams, and how do you do that prior to getting into combat? Know
your soldiers. Understand where they come from. They come from all different walks of life. You need to study your soldiers like they're a book. You need to, I knew how many siblings they had. I knew where they were from. Shit, I've called parents before when my soldiers were acting up. You know what I'm saying? If they're going to act like kids, I'm going to treat them like kids. So you have to understand your soldiers, but you have to also be smart in your job. You don't have to be the most physically fit and the smartest guy out there, but you need to understand your job. And you need to always remember that every decision that you make, there's a soldier at the end of your decision. And you need to always keep that in mind. Let's see, how have I been able to deal with these traumatic experiences? I use my experiences to train my soldiers. So when I got back from my deployment, I trained my soldiers on my experiences. I told them, this happened, that happened. And so in their mind, I'm just training them based off my experiences. But in my opinion, I was coping with it. And I figure if I start talking about it, it helps me cope with it. So they think I'm training, but I'm actually just coping myself. So that was one thing that worked for me. I didn't want to go to alcohol or drugs or anything like that. So, I just train my soldiers. I talk about it. I help people out. And then obviously writing the book helped me as well. My soldiers, after that experience of being surrounded and completely cut off by an enemy force that completely outnumbers you, some of them are not doing very well. One of them still in the military. Melton, he was in Korea. I can't remember where he's going next, but Doyle got out. He kind of had a hard time. Garcia also had a very, very rough time. Because you got to remember, I just explained 2 days, and we were there for 2 years. These are probably the most highlighted, but there are a lot more danger close death situations that each one of these guys have been through. So they weren't doing so well, but I mean they're doing better now. They're not alcoholics. They're not living on the street. Garcia's in Hollywood now doing stand-up comedy and stuff. So they're doing pretty good. How do I muster the courage to continue in the face of death? You don't know how you're going to do when you first face it, but like I said, I revert back to the day in September of 2009, and if my NCOs can do it, I could do it. And so I really base a lot of my leadership style off of what I witnessed that day, and I kind of remember that in every decision that I make and how I interact with people. The transition coming back to the States sucked. I think it sucks for everybody because you don't have your weapon, you're by yourself, you're no longer living with your boys, you kind of feel alone in the whole situation. And so you kind of have to pick up a hobby. You got to do something else to get your mind off things because the transition always is very difficult for a lot of people. Were you ever at a loss for ideas when you were faced with making quick and difficult decisions? No, because a training comes into play. As long as you have good training, then you shouldn't worry about making decisions. Now, I might not have always made the right decision. you know, when I got that lube in that truck and I was getting ready to go back out, Melton wanted to come out with me. And I told him, no, like, you got to stay in here with these guys. And that was probably a very selfish moment of me because I took experience away from him. But, you know, I just refused. I refused to bury my soldiers. Like, I refused to put them in a body bag. If anything, my soldiers were going to put me in a body bag. And I didn't want to have to take them home like I did Lieutenant Parton. So it was probably a very selfish moment of me to make that decision. But it was what, at the time, I thought the better tactical decision at that point. So. What's been the most rewarding part of your time in the Army? Honestly, I have way too many to think. I've had a blessed career, but honestly, just leading soldiers. Leading soldiers is the best thing that I've ever done in my entire life. How do you manage to stay calm? Again, just training, repetition, and sometimes it comes naturally to some people. You know, a lot of my leaders that I saw in combat, they were just natural born leaders. And so, not that I'm saying I was natural, but because I did take a lot of what I learned from them. So you just got to practice. You got to stay calm and put yourselves into situations that are vulnerable so you can make better decisions later on. How do you mentally prepare yourself for the harshness of combat? Train. That's all you can do. Like I said, you can never train enough for situations like that. You can't even replicate them in a training environment. There's just some things you can't train for. But if you give yourself repetitions, everyone's on the same page, you understand what needs to be done, you know the difference between immediate and remedial action on everything that you do, then you'll be successful. In those moments, what was the main thing going through your head and your soldiers' head? My soldiers, no idea. Probably they were scared shitless the same way I was my first deployment. My head, again, was to keep them alive. And I just wanted to kill as many as I could, essentially. What's your best recommendation for new PLs, especially infantry and MP? Completely different MOSs, but like I said, study and know your job. Read your MP manual, read the infantry guide, and understand every type of formation, understand the structure and capabilities of your unit, and how to employ them against different situations of enemy forces. That's the best thing you do as an LT, so you can make good decisions. What advice do you have for units without combat experience leaders? I mean, it doesn't really matter. Both my deployments, I had I think my first deployment, I think 6 people out of 180 of my company had ever been to Afghanistan, and we walked away with the Valorous Unit Award, multiple Purple Hearts, multiple Valor Awards. Like I said, we just had good training and good people with good mindsets to get us out of some situations. So just train. That's all you can do. I kind of already hit on that one. What was the most impactful thing a leader did for you throughout your military career? What advice do you have for future officers that are coming into the Army? That's kind of a hard one. I've had a lot of leaders just be good listeners, talk to me. I had a platoon sergeant. Long story short, there was a wounded Afghan kid I put a tourniquet on, and we didn't cause him to be wounded. And so the rules of engagement were, if we didn't cause it, we don't treat it. And they wanted me to remove the tourniquet, and I told them, "Go fuck yourself. I'm not removing the tourniquet." And when we got back to base, they were getting ready to chew me out, and my platoon sergeant took the hit and said, "No, I told him to do it." And yeah, it was just that selfless service of being there for me. What would you have changed or done different in a situation where you encountered the Taliban? Killed more, if I could, plain and simple. I did everything I could. My soldiers did everything they could to kill as many as we could. That's all we can do. If you could change one thing about how you handled the situations you were put in, what would they be? What are some post and pre decisions or trainings that you would take? I don't try to Monday quarterback a lot of the decisions I made. I think we did the best that we could in that time in a situation like that. I don't try to AAR everything myself, but I just try to take it for future training opportunities and figure out how we're going to employ it in our next conflict. The name of my book is Ghosts of the Valley. Again, it's on Amazon, Nook, or Kindle. And since you mentioned writing the book, has that helped you process those experiences? And what was the biggest challenge you faced putting pen to paper? And what advice do you have for others who want to use writing publishing to share their experiences? Yeah, so most officers are the ones who write the book. You know, you got your generals, your Mattis, your General Allens, your Petraeuses, and they all write books. And I said, well, why can't I write a book? I'm enlisted, and you don't see that a lot. And I wanted to do it to show the younger soldiers that, you know, I was a C average student at best. I went to junior college and dropped out. Didn't get my degree until 11 years in the Army. And if I could do it, then the younger soldiers can do it. And it's nice to look back and say that now I'm an author. And I want to encourage those younger soldiers to work outside just being a specialist in the Army. Find a different title that you could carry with you for after the military. And that's something you should always encourage your soldiers to do, educational wise and self-development and stuff like that. So, okay, I think that's the end of the questions. Can you go to the last slide, please? So this is probably the most important slide to me. If you could please take a screenshot, take a picture on your phone right now. This is an opportunity I'm providing to, I don't know, the hundreds that are watching this right now. This is my personal cell phone. This is my personal email. You could find me on Facebook and you could find me on Instagram. I'm probably on Instagram a little bit more, but I am teaming up with other veteran companies to help veterans. We push resources out there all the time. You know, as you start your endeavor and, you know, at being a cadet in West Point, as you start to go commission to be an officer, please save my number in your phone. You can message me as soon as I get off this thing. You can message me on Facebook and Instagram. I will reply to all your messages. I check everything. If you guys need someone to talk to, if you're having a hard time dealing with something as you're going through your schooling, you don't understand something, if you just need a mentor, or when you commission and you run against a soldier situation that maybe you don't feel comfortable going to your chain of command about, and you need someone to talk to, I am there. I will help however I can. If I can't figure it out, I will find someone who is smarter than me that can figure it out. So please save my information. If you need anything, message me at any point in time. I promise you, you will not be bothering me. So other than that, this concludes today's brief, and I appreciate your attendance. And I'm sorry if I talked way too fast, but hopefully you took something out of it. And again, thank you for hosting me, gentlemen, who are all listening.